I watched my snowplow disappear around the corner on the back of a flatbed tow truck at 6:30 in the morning, and that's when I knew this day was going to be absolute hell. The storm had started 3 hours ago, and I'd already cleared Main Street, the hospital access roads, and half of the residential zones in Clearwater County, Montana. My coffee thermos was empty. My fingers were numb despite the heater blasting in my truck, and I'd stopped at my house in the Ridgemont Estates development for exactly 10 minutes to grab food and use the bathroom. 10 minutes. I'd left the plow running in my driveway because the temperature was 12 degrees below zero, and you don't shut off a diesel engine in that kind of cold unless you want to spend an hour trying to restart it. But apparently, those 10 minutes were enough for Deborah Jenkins, the president of our illustrious Homeowners Association, to call a tow truck and have my vehicle removed from my own property. I stood in my driveway in my thermal coveralls, holding a turkey sandwich I'd never gotten to eat, watching the taillights fade into the swirling snow. My phone buzzed. The County Emergency Services Coordinator, Tom Matthews. "Yannick, where are you?" "We've got 3 jackknifed semis on Highway 89, and the nursing home is completely snowed in. They're saying if we don't get their entrance cleared in the next hour, the morning shift can't get in and the night shift can't leave." "Tom, I've got a situation. Someone just towed my plow." There was a long silence. "Someone what, towed it? My HOA president saw it in my driveway and had it towed." "Yannick, you're messing with me right now." "I wish I was." Another silence, longer this time. I could hear him breathing, could practically feel him trying to process what I'd just said. "Yannick, you're the only licensed commercial snow removal operator in the entire county. You know that, right? The only one certified to operate the equipment, the only one with the insurance, the only one on the emergency services roster. I'm aware. So your HOA just left 11,000 people without snow removal services in the middle of a Category 3 winter storm. Looks that way." "Where did they tow it to?" I was already looking at the bright orange sticker plastered to my garage door. "Morton's Impound on Industrial Drive." "Get down there. I'll call Morton myself and explain the situation. This is insane." I hung up and immediately dialed Morton's. A bored voice answered after 6 rings. "Morton's Impound. This is Yannick Yates. You just towed my snowplow about 5 minutes ago. I need it back immediately. I'm the county's emergency snow removal operator and I'm currently on active duty." "Yeah, I heard something about that on the radio." "Thing is, we can't release it without authorization from whoever requested the tow and payment of fees." "How much?" $350 for the tow, $100 a day storage, and there's a $200 administrative fee for commercial vehicles. $650 to get my truck back so I can literally save lives." "That's correct, sir. I wanted to throw my phone into the snow. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I climbed into my personal truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 that I used for everything except plowing, and headed toward the impound lot. The roads were getting worse by the minute. 4 inches had fallen already, with another 12 to 18 predicted before the storm system moved through. My windshield wipers could barely keep up. My phone rang again. This time it was Deborah. "Mr. Yates, I wanted to inform you that your vehicle was towed this morning for violation of HOA Covenant Section 12. Subsection 4, which clearly states that no commercial vehicles may be parked in resident driveways or visible from the street. You were warned about this last month." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. "Deborah, I'm currently the only person in this county who can legally operate snow removal equipment. I'm on emergency services duty. That plow is county property, and you just had it impounded during an active storm emergency. The covenants make no exception for emergencies, Mr. Yates. If you have an issue with the rules, you're welcome to submit a formal appeal at our next board meeting on February 15th. February 15th. You want me to wait 3 weeks, during which time you and everyone else in this development, not to mention the entire county, will be buried under snow because nobody can plow the roads. I'm sure the county will find an alternative solution. The rules exist for a reason. This is a prestigious community, and we have standards to maintain. That snowplow is an eyesore and diminishes property values. Deborah, people are going to get hurt. The nursing home can't change shifts. Emergency vehicles can't get through. There are people stranded on the highway right now. That's not my concern, Mr. Yates. My concern is maintaining the aesthetic integrity of Ridgemont Estates. Have a good day. She hung up. I sat at a red light that I was probably the only person in town still bothering to obey and tried to control my breathing. 5 years. I'd lived in Ridgemont Estates for 5 years. I'd bought the house because it was affordable and close to my equipment storage facility. I'd paid my HOA dues on time every single quarter. I'd followed their ridiculous rules about mailbox colors and lawn height and holiday decoration timeframes. And the one single time I'd left a work vehicle in my driveway during an actual emergency, Deborah had pounced. The thing was, she'd been escalating for months. It had started with a written warning about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall in July. Then a complaint about my trash cans being visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was because the collection schedule had changed and I'd forgotten. Then, a citation because my house numbers weren't the approved font. Every violation came with a $50 fine, and they were piling up. I tried to be reasonable. I'd gone to a board meeting and explained that I ran a snow removal business, that I was the primary emergency services contractor for the county, that there might be times during winter when I'd need to keep equipment at my house for rapid response. The board had consisted of Deborah, her friend Margaret Thompson, and a guy named Carl Fisher who clearly just wanted to go home. They'd voted 3-0 to deny my request for an exception. Rules are rules, Deborah had said, smiling that tight smile she always wore when she was crushing someone's reasonable request under her sensible pumps. Now here we were. Morton's Impound was a chain-link fortress on the industrial edge of Clearwater, surrounded by auto body shops and a concrete plant. I pulled into the lot and found the office, a converted shipping container with a space heater, and a guy who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. I called about my snowplow, I said. He didn't look up from his phone. ID and payment. I handed over my driver's license and credit card. He processed them with the enthusiasm of someone filing their taxes and printed out a receipt. Bay 7, keys are in it. That's it. You're not going to check with Deborah Jenkins. Lady already called and said you'd probably show up. Said to make sure you paid before release. Money's money. He shrugged. Not my circus. I found my plow in Bay 7, covered in fresh snow that was already accumulating. It took me 5 minutes to brush it off and another 10 to get the engine started in the cold. By the time I rolled out of the impound lot, it was 7:45, more than an hour since I'd stopped at my house. Tom called again immediately. You get it? Yeah, I'm heading to the nursing home now. Good. Listen, I've been making calls. What your HOA did could be considered interference with emergency services. That's actually a misdemeanor in Montana. I'm talking to the county attorney about it. Tom, I just want to do my job. I don't want to start a legal war with my neighbors. Yannick, she didn't just inconvenience you. She compromised public safety during a declared emergency. The governor activated the emergency operations plan at 5 this morning. Your HOA president just violated state law. I absorbed that information as I turned onto Highway 89. The nursing home was 15 minutes away and the roads were barely passable. What does that mean? It means I'm filing a formal complaint with the sheriff's office. Let them sort it out. You focus on plowing. The nursing home situation was worse than I'd expected. The entrance was buried under 18 inches of packed snow, and an ambulance was sitting at the street, unable to get in. I spent 45 minutes clearing the lot and access drive while nurses in scrubs stood outside smoking in the cold, waiting for relief. By 9:30, I'd moved on to Highway 89. The jackknifed semis had been cleared, but the road was a mess. I worked steadily, making passes up and down the highway, pushing snow into the median and onto the shoulders. Other drivers honked and waved as they passed. One guy rolled down his window at a stoplight. "Thank God you're here, man. This was getting dangerous." I just nodded. I was too tired to explain that I'd almost not been there at all. Around 11, I stopped at a gas station to fuel up and grab more coffee. The teenager behind the counter looked exhausted. "You're the plow guy, right? Everyone's been talking about you on Facebook, something about your HOA." Word travels fast. "Dude, it's all over the county page. People are pissed. Like, really pissed. Someone started a petition or something." I paid for my coffee and checked my phone in the truck. Sure enough, the Clearwater County Community Facebook group had exploded. Someone had posted about the situation and there were already 300 comments. I scrolled through them while the truck idled. This is insane. That HOA lady should be arrested. I know Yannick. He's a good guy. Works his butt off every winter. This is complete garbage. HOAs are a plague. This is exactly why I'll never live in one of those neighborhoods. My mom is a nurse at Maplewood. She said they almost couldn't do shift change because the parking lot wasn't cleared. People could have died. There were angrier ones too, including several calling for Deborah to be removed from the board and a few suggesting that people show up at her house to protest. I closed the app. The last thing I needed was this turning into a mob situation. But I couldn't help feeling a small, petty sense of satisfaction. Deborah had spent years positioning herself as the guardian of community standards, the protector of property values, the enforcer of rules. Now everyone in the county knew what that really meant. I spent the rest of the day working. The main roads, the school parking lots, the medical center, the fire station. Every critical piece of infrastructure in Clearwater County got cleared. By 6 in the evening, I was running on fumes and caffeine, and the storm was finally starting to ease up. The snow had stopped falling around 4, and now the sky was clearing, revealing a sunset that painted the mountains pink and gold. My phone rang. "Sheriff's office. Mr. Yates. This is Deputy Chen with the Clearwater County Sheriff's Office. I wanted to update you on the situation with your HOA. We've opened an investigation into Deborah Jenkins for obstruction of emergency services. We'll need to get a statement from you, probably tomorrow if that works. What exactly is she being charged with?" "Right now, it's just an investigation, but we're looking at misdemeanor obstruction. It's a relatively minor charge, usually a fine and possible probation, but given the circumstances and the public safety implications, the prosecutor might push for something more serious. We're also looking into whether the HOA board as a whole bears responsibility. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen again. I need to be able to do my job. Understood. We'll be in touch." I drove home as darkness fell, exhausted in every possible way. The streets of Ridgemont Estates were clear, because I'd plowed them myself around noon, between highway runs. My driveway was exactly as I'd left it that morning, with the tire tracks from the tow truck still visible in the snow. I parked my plow in the driveway, went inside, and collapsed on the couch. I didn't even take off my coveralls. I was asleep in minutes. The next morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my door. I checked my phone. 8:30. I'd slept for 14 hours. The pounding continued. I dragged myself off the couch and opened the door to find a woman I didn't recognize holding a casserole dish. Yannick Yates. I'm Patricia Morrison. I live over on Elm Street, outside your development. I just wanted to bring you this and say thank you for everything you did yesterday. My daughter has diabetes and we had to get to the pharmacy for her insulin. If you hadn't cleared the roads, I don't know what we would have done. I took the casserole dish, still trying to wake up. Oh, thank you, you didn't have to do that. Are you kidding? You're a hero. Everyone's talking about it. That HOA lady should be ashamed of herself. After Patricia left, 3 more people showed up within an hour. Someone brought cookies. Someone brought a fruit basket. An elderly man I vaguely recognized from the hardware store brought a case of beer and shook my hand for a solid 30 seconds. You're good people, he said. Don't let those HOA vultures tell you different. Around 10, Tom from emergency services called. Hey, you recovered from yesterday. Getting there. What's up? County commissioners want to meet with you. They're concerned about the vulnerability of having a single operator for snow removal, especially after what happened. They want to talk about contracts, backup plans, maybe hiring additional staff. You interested? Definitely. Great. Meeting's Thursday at 2. Also, you should know that the story got picked up by the Billings Gazette. Reporter called me this morning asking for details. This is turning into a bigger deal than anyone expected. After he hung up, I checked the news. Sure enough, there was an article. HOA president impounds county's only snowplow during emergency. The story was factual but damning. It outlined the timeline, included quotes from Tom about the public safety implications, and mentioned the ongoing investigation. It had been shared hundreds of times already. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Margaret Thompson from the HOA board. We need to talk. Can you meet today? I stared at the message. Margaret had been at that board meeting, had voted against my request for an exception. But she'd also seemed uncomfortable the whole time, like she didn't really want to be there. I texted back. When and where? Coffee on Main at noon. Fine. I used the morning to catch up on paperwork and equipment maintenance. The plow had taken a beating during yesterday's marathon session, and I needed to check the hydraulics and replace a worn edge blade. Around 11:30, I cleaned up and headed downtown. Coffee on Main was a local place, the kind with mismatched furniture and locally roasted beans. Margaret was already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking nervous. She was probably in her early 50s, with short gray hair and the careful posture of someone who spent too much time sitting at a desk. Thanks for meeting me, she said as I sat down. I know you probably don't want to talk to anyone from the board right now. You got that right. She winced. Look, I need you to understand something. I didn't want any of this to happen. When Deborah said she was calling a tow truck yesterday morning, I told her it was a terrible idea. I told her you were on emergency duty, that the county needed you, that this was going to blow up in her face. She didn't care. Then why didn't you stop her? Because Deborah runs that board like a dictatorship. She controls the agenda, she controls the votes, and if you disagree with her, she makes your life miserable. I've seen her do it to other residents. The constant violation notices, the fines, the harassment. I stayed on the board because I thought I could moderate her worst impulses, but honestly, I'm just enabling her at this point. I ordered a coffee from the waitress who appeared. Margaret waited until she left. I'm resigning from the board, Margaret continued. I'm going to send a formal letter today, and I'm going to recommend that the other board members call for Deborah's removal. What she did was inexcusable, and if the HOA gets sued over this, which it probably will, I don't want to be part of it. Is Carl resigning too? I don't know. Carl just does whatever Deborah tells him. He's been on the board for 6 years, and I don't think he's ever had an independent thought about HOA business. She leaned forward. Yannick, I'm sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have stood up to her. What happened yesterday could have gotten people killed, and I'm partially responsible. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry at her, at the whole board, at the entire concept of HOAs. But she seemed genuinely remorseful, and that was more than I could say for Deborah. I appreciate you telling me this, I finally said. There's something else. Deborah's talking about escalating. She's saying that you violated the covenants again by parking the plow in your driveway last night. She wants to file for an emergency injunction to ban you from keeping any commercial vehicles on the property. She's got to be kidding. She's not. She's talking to a lawyer today. I think she's panicking because of the news coverage and the investigation, and she's doubling down instead of backing off. My coffee arrived. I took a sip and tried to think through the implications. If she gets an injunction, where am I supposed to keep the plow? The only storage facility close enough for emergency response is my house. I know. That's why I'm telling you. You might want to talk to a lawyer yourself. We talked for a few more minutes, but there wasn't much else to say. Margaret left first, and I sat there staring at my coffee, trying to figure out my next move. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Robert Kaufman, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Billings, but he agreed to consult over the phone. I've been following your situation in the news, he said after I explained everything. This is one of the more egregious HOA overreach cases I've seen. Here's the good news. Montana law provides some protections for homeowners against unreasonable covenant enforcement. The bad news, fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. What about the injunction she's threatening? If she files for one, we'll oppose it. Given the circumstances and the public interest involved, I doubt any judge would grant it. But you never know. In the meantime, I'd recommend documenting everything. Every interaction with the HOA, every fine, every notice. We might need it. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. Beyond that, it depends on how far she wants to take this. I thanked him and hung up. $5,000 just to start. And that was on top of the impound fees I'd already paid. Deborah's petty power trip was turning into a financial nightmare. Thursday's meeting with the county commissioners went better. There were 3 of them, plus Tom and a few other emergency services coordinators. They listened as I explained my operation, my equipment, my certifications, and the challenges of being a single operator covering an entire county. What we're proposing, said Commissioner Anderson, a middle-aged woman with a practical air, is a formal contract that provides better compensation and includes funding for you to hire and train a backup operator. We also want to explore purchasing a second plow as county property, so we're not dependent on a single piece of equipment. That sounds reasonable, I said. We're also prepared to support you in your dispute with your HOA. The county has an interest in ensuring that essential emergency services aren't disrupted by private covenant enforcement. We're considering filing an amicus brief if this goes to court. By the time I left the meeting, I had a preliminary contract that would double my annual retainer from the county and provide funding for equipment upgrades. It wasn't enough to make me rich, but it was fair compensation for the work I did. That evening I got home to find another notice on my door. This one was printed on HOA letterhead. Final notice, violation of Covenant Section 12, subsection 4, commercial vehicle parked in driveway on January 21. Fine, $500. Vehicle must be removed within 24 hours or additional daily fines of $100 will be assessed. Continued violation may result in legal action including injunction and lien against property. $500. For parking my work truck in my own driveway after spending 16 hours keeping the county safe during a blizzard. I took a picture of the notice and sent it to Robert Kaufman. He called me back within an hour. "She's lost her mind," he said flatly. "This is harassment at this point. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter. In the meantime, don't pay that fine. Don't communicate with her directly. Let me handle it. What about the plow? I need it at my house for emergency response. Keep it there. If she tries to tow it again or files for an injunction, we'll deal with it. You have a legitimate need to keep that vehicle on your property, and the public interest supports it. Any reasonable court will see that." The cease and desist letter went out Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Deborah had responded by scheduling an emergency HOA board meeting for Saturday to discuss ongoing covenant violations and resident misconduct. Margaret texted me, "Meeting tomorrow is about you. Deborah is going to try to get the board to authorize legal action. I already resigned, but I thought you should know." Saturday morning, I showed up at the community center where the HOA held meetings. I wasn't required to be there, but I wanted to see this for myself. The room was packed. Apparently, word had gotten out and half the neighborhood had shown up. I recognized faces from around the development, people I'd waved to at the mailbox or nodded at during evening walks. Most of them looked angry. Deborah sat at a table at the front with Carl. Margaret's seat was empty. Deborah looked tense, her usual composed expression cracking around the edges. She called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss ongoing violations of community covenants by a resident who has repeatedly ignored warnings and continues to diminish the aesthetic value of our neighborhood. Mr. Yates has been—" "Oh, give it a rest, Deborah," someone shouted from the back. I turned and saw it was Mike Peterson, who lived 3 houses down from me. "Everyone here knows what you did. You impounded his plow during a blizzard. You put people in danger. You're a disgrace to this community." There was a rumble of agreement. Deborah's face flushed red. "Mr. Peterson, you're out of order. This is not an open forum. If you can't be respectful, you'll be asked to leave." "Respectful? You want to talk about respect? How about respecting the fact that Yannick saves our butts every winter? How about respecting public safety? How about respecting basic human decency?" More people started talking at once. Someone called for Deborah's resignation. Someone else suggested a vote of no confidence. Carl sat there looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Deborah stood up, her hands shaking slightly. "This meeting is adjourned. We'll reschedule when people can behave appropriately." "Don't bother," someone else called out. "We're circulating a petition to dissolve the board and rewrite the covenants. We've already got 50 signatures." I left before things got more heated. The satisfaction I'd felt earlier was replaced by something more complicated. I hadn't wanted to be the center of a community war. I just wanted to do my job and live my life. But Deborah hadn't given me that option. Monday brought more developments. Deputy Chen called and asked me to come to the sheriff's office to give a formal statement. I spent an hour going through everything that had happened, from the initial warnings about commercial vehicles to the impound during the storm. They recorded the whole thing. "We're moving forward with charges," Deputy Chen told me. "Misdemeanor obstruction of emergency services. The prosecutor feels there's enough evidence, especially given the documented emergency declaration and your role as the sole contracted operator. Miss Jenkins will be formally charged this week. What happens after that? She'll be arraigned, probably enter a plea. If she pleads not guilty, there'll be a trial. If guilty, probably a fine and probation for a first offense, but it'll be on her record. Wednesday morning, I was clearing snow from a county maintenance facility when Tom called. "You see the news?" "No, what happened?" "Deborah Jenkins was arrested this morning." "Well, not arrested exactly. She was issued a summons and released, but the press is calling it an arrest and it's all over social media. The story's going regional. I just saw it on the Spokane News." I pulled over and checked my phone. Sure enough, the headlines were everywhere. Montana HOA president charged after impounding snowplow during storm. HOA board member faces criminal charges over emergency services interference. The articles included Deborah's mugshot, or rather her driver's license photo, since she hadn't actually been booked. She looked exactly like you'd expect, tight-lipped, disapproving, absolutely convinced of her own righteousness. The comments sections were brutal. People from all over the region were weighing in, sharing their own HOA horror stories, calling for reforms to covenant enforcement laws. A few people defended her, mostly other HOA board members who insisted that rules had to be followed regardless of circumstances. But they were vastly outnumbered. That evening, Robert Kaufman called with an update. "The HOA's insurance company reached out to me. They want to settle. They're offering to drop all fines against you, formally exempt your property from the commercial vehicle restriction, and cover your legal fees up to the amount of my retainer." "What about Deborah? She's being removed from the board." "The insurance company is insisting on it as a condition of continuing coverage. Apparently, they consider her a liability risk now. Carl's resigning too. They're going to hold new elections for a completely fresh board." "So it's over." The civil side, "Yes, assuming you accept the settlement. The criminal case against Deborah will proceed separately. That's not your concern anymore." I thought about it. The settlement gave me everything I'd wanted. The ability to do my job without harassment, compensation for my expenses, and the HOA off my back. Pushing for more would just drag things out. "I'll take it," I said. The settlement was finalized within a week. I signed the papers at Robert's office in Billings, and just like that, the HOA situation was resolved. The new board elections were scheduled for March, and according to Margaret, several reasonable people were running, including Mike Peterson. The criminal case took longer. Deborah pleaded not guilty initially, insisting that she'd just been enforcing legitimate covenants and had no way of knowing her actions would cause public safety issues. The prosecutor argued that the emergency declaration had been public knowledge, and that any reasonable person would have understood the implications of impounding emergency equipment during an active storm. The trial was held in late March. I had to testify, explaining my role as the county's sole snow removal operator and the impact of the impound on my ability to respond to the emergency. Tom testified about the emergency services coordination. Even the nursing home administrator testified about the delayed shift change and the potential risk to patients. Deborah's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been acting within her authority as HOA president, and that the covenant violations were legitimate regardless of timing. The judge wasn't impressed. The verdict came back guilty on one count of misdemeanor obstruction. Deborah was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $2,000. She was also ordered to attend a course on emergency services coordination, which I thought was a nice touch. Outside the courthouse, A reporter from the Gazette asked me how I felt about the verdict. "I'm just glad it's over," I said. "I never wanted any of this to become a big deal. I just wanted to do my job and help my community. Hopefully, this sends a message that public safety has to come before bureaucratic rule enforcement." Do you think HOAs serve a useful purpose? I think they can, when they're run by reasonable people who understand that rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. But when you get someone on a power trip who cares more about aesthetics than people, it can turn toxic fast. That quote ended up being the headline. Snowplow operator, rules exist to serve community, not the other way around. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The new HOA board was elected in March, and Mike Peterson became president. Their first act was to completely rewrite the covenant section about commercial vehicles, adding explicit exceptions for emergency services personnel, licensed contractors working from home, and other reasonable uses. The county finalized my new contract, and I hired a guy named Jake Morrison to train as a backup operator. He was fresh out of technical college with a commercial driving certification and eager to learn. By the following winter, we had 2 plows and a proper rotation system that meant I wasn't running myself into the ground during storms. Deborah moved out of Ridgemont Estates that summer. Someone told me she'd bought a condo in Billings, somewhere without an HOA. I never saw her again, and that was fine with me. One afternoon in late November, just before the first major snowfall of the season, I was doing maintenance on the plows when Margaret stopped by. She'd stayed in the neighborhood and had even volunteered to serve on one of the new HOA committees, the one focused on emergency preparedness. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing me an envelope. "It's from the HOA. Well, the new one." Inside was a letter thanking me for my service to the community and a gift card to Coffee on Main. "We also voted to establish an annual award," Margaret continued. "The Yannick Yates Community Service Award. It'll go to a resident who goes above and beyond for their neighbors. You're the inaugural recipient, obviously, but we thought it would be a nice way to honor what you do and encourage others to think about community service." I didn't know what to say. After everything that had happened, after all the stress and conflict and legal battles, it was a small gesture. But it meant something. "Thank you," I managed. "No, thank you. You reminded all of us what really matters. It's not property values or perfect mailboxes or any of that superficial stuff. It's looking out for each other, being there when it counts. That's what makes a community worth living in." That winter was one of the busiest on record. We had 7 major storms between December and March, including one that dumped 26 inches in 18 hours. But with 2 operators and proper equipment, we handled it. The roads stayed clear, emergency services could move freely, and nobody got stranded at nursing homes. I'd get waves from people as I plowed, or honks of appreciation. Sometimes I'd stop for coffee and someone would buy it for me before I could pull out my wallet. The guy at the hardware store started giving me a discount without me asking. "For services rendered," he'd say with a wink. One evening in February, I was plowing Main Street when I passed Coffee on Main. Through the window, I could see it was packed with people escaping the cold. Families having dinner, couples on dates, old-timers nursing coffee and solving the world's problems. Normal life happening because the roads were clear and the town was functional. That's what the job was really about, not the contracts or the equipment or even the emergency response protocols. It was about making normal life possible when nature tried to shut everything down. It was about the nurse who could get to work, the kid who could get to school, the elderly person who could get to the doctor. All the invisible infrastructure of daily existence that people only noticed when it wasn't there. I thought about Deborah sometimes, about how she'd been so focused on maintaining appearances that she'd lost sight of actual human needs. The perfect neighborhood she'd envisioned was a place where everyone followed the rules, where nothing was out of place, where property values were protected at all costs. But that's not what makes a place worth living in. What makes a place worth living in is knowing that when things go wrong, your neighbors will have your back. That when there's an emergency, people will step up. That the rules exist to help everyone flourish, not to enforce someone's narrow vision of perfection. The irony was that by trying to create her perfect community, she'd nearly destroyed it. It was only after she was gone that Ridgemont Estates actually became the kind of place people wanted to live. By the time spring arrived and the snow finally melted, I was exhausted but satisfied. Jake had turned into a solid operator, the equipment was in good shape, and the county commissioners were already talking about expanding the program for the next winter. There was even discussion of creating a regional cooperation agreement with neighboring counties, sharing resources and personnel during major events. In May, I got a letter from the Montana Association of County Officials. They wanted me to speak at their summer conference about emergency services coordination and the importance of protecting essential personnel from regulatory interference. Apparently, my situation had sparked conversations across the state about how to prevent similar problems. I agreed to do it, though public speaking wasn't exactly my forte. But if sharing my story could help other emergency services workers avoid the nightmare I'd gone through, it was worth the discomfort. The conference was in Helena in July. I drove over with Jake, who wanted to see the Capitol. My presentation was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon in a conference room that held about 100 people. I expected maybe 20 to show up. The room was standing room only. I talked for 30 minutes about what had happened, the impact on emergency services, and the broader lessons about balancing private governance with public safety. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than I expected. During the Q&A session, a county commissioner from Missoula raised his hand. "We've had similar issues in our jurisdiction," he said. "HOAs interfering with emergency personnel, citing covenant violations during active incidents. Have you considered working with the state legislature to clarify the law?" I hadn't, actually. "You should. I think there'd be strong support for a bill that explicitly protects emergency services personnel from covenant enforcement during declared emergencies. Would you be willing to testify if we drafted something?" "Absolutely." And just like that, the ripples kept spreading. What had started as a petty dispute with an overzealous HOA president had turned into a statewide conversation about emergency services, community governance, and the proper limits of private rule enforcement. By the following January, when the state legislature convened, there was a bill on the docket, the Emergency Services Protection Act. It prohibited HOAs from enforcing covenants against emergency services personnel during declared emergencies and created penalties for violations. I testified during committee hearings, telling my story again to a room full of lawmakers who seemed genuinely concerned about preventing similar situations. The bill passed unanimously in both chambers and was signed by the governor in March. It wouldn't fix every problem with HOA overreach, but it was a start. That spring, I got a call from Deborah. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Yannick, this is Deborah Jenkins. I know you probably don't want to hear from me." "What do you want, Deborah?" There was a long pause. I wanted to apologize. I've spent the last year in therapy, trying to understand why I acted the way I did. My therapist says I have control issues stemming from childhood trauma, and that I was using the HOA as a way to impose order on a world that felt chaotic. That's not an excuse for what I did. What I did was wrong, and it could have gotten people hurt. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything for a moment. Part of me wanted to just hang up, but she sounded genuine, and holding on to anger wasn't doing me any good. I appreciate you saying that, I finally replied. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how badly I messed up. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're still doing what you do. The world needs people like you. After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a while, thinking. People were complicated. Deborah had been a nightmare to deal with, had caused me enormous stress and expense, had literally been convicted of a crime because of her actions. But she was also apparently trying to do better, trying to understand herself and change. I wasn't sure I'd ever fully forgive her, but I could let go of the anger. Life was too short to carry that kind of weight around. That summer, the new HOA board threw a community barbecue in the park at the center of Ridgemont Estates. It was the first real community event they'd organized, and it seemed like everyone showed up. There were grills going, kids playing on the playground, neighbors actually talking to each other instead of just waving from driveways. Mike Peterson found me by the dessert table. "This is what it should have always been like," he said, gesturing at the crowd. People actually enjoying living here instead of being terrified of the next violation notice. "You guys have done a good job with the board. We're trying. Still some grumbling from the old guard about standards slipping, but most people are happy. Property values are actually up, which is funny since that was Deborah's whole justification for being so strict. Turns out people like living in places where they're not constantly harassed." "Who knew?" Mike laughed and grabbed a brownie. "Seriously though, thanks for sticking it out. A lot of people would have just moved after all that." I thought about it. But this is home. I wasn't going to let one person drive me away. As the sun set and the barbecue wound down, I found myself standing at the edge of the park, watching families pack up their stuff and head home. This was what community was supposed to look like. Not perfect houses in perfect rows with perfect lawns. Just people living their lives, helping each other out, creating something worth being part of. The first snow of the season came early that November, a surprise storm that dumped 8 inches overnight. I was up at 4 in the morning, drinking coffee and watching the weather radar. Jake called at 4:30. "I'm heading out to start the residential routes." "You want me to take the highway first?" "No, I'll take the highway. You start in town. We'll meet up at the county garage around 8 to switch out if needed." "Sounds good. Stay safe out there." I climbed into my plow, started the engine, and pulled out of my driveway. No tow trucks, no violation notices, no HOA drama. Just me, my truck, and a job that needed doing. The roads were empty and quiet, the snow still falling in that peaceful way it does before dawn. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the swirling flakes. The plow blade scraped against asphalt, pushing snow aside, clearing the way for the day ahead. This was what I'd been trying to protect all along. Not just my right to park a truck in my driveway, but the ability to do this work, to serve my community, to be there when people needed me. The fight with Deborah had been about so much more than HOA covenants. It had been about whether rigid adherence to rules mattered more than human well-being. About whether power would be used to help people or control them. About what kind of community we wanted to be. I was glad we'd ended up on the right side of those questions. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, I made another pass down Highway 89. Behind me, the road was clear and safe. Ahead of me, more work waited. And somewhere back in Ridgemont Estates, my neighbors were waking up to cleared streets and the ability to go about their lives. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody was going to write songs about the guy who plows snow. But it mattered, and that was enough. On winter mornings like this, when the world was buried under fresh snow and everything was quiet and clean, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom at Emergency Services. Multiple accidents on Route 12. Can you head that way after you finish the highway? On my way, I texted back. I turned the plow around and headed west, toward where I was needed, toward the next emergency, toward another day of making sure my community could function despite whatever winter threw at us. The sun was fully up now, the storm was clearing, and there was work to be done. And unlike that morning over a year ago when I'd watched my plow disappear on a tow truck, today nobody was going to stop me from doing it.